The finger came down like a gavel. John Wayne leaned forward in his chair, not fast, not dramatic, the way a large and very tired man leans forward when he has run completely out of patience, and pointed his index finger directly at Frank Sinatra's chest. The Tonight Show studio held 300 people that night. Every single one of them stopped breathing at the same moment. Johnny Carson did not move. His coffee mug was halfway to his lips, and it stayed there, suspended, forgotten, while his eyes tracked from Wayne to Sinatra and back again, with the careful stillness of a man who has spent 30 years learning how to stay calm on camera, and is now genuinely uncertain whether that skill is going to be enough. Sinatra looked at the finger. Then he looked at Wayne's face. His jaw shifted. Not fear, something older and more complicated than fear. The expression of a man who has just had something private dragged into a very public room and is deciding in real time what that is going to cost the man who dragged it there. Wayne spoke. 3 words, low and controlled, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume because the room has already gone that quiet on its own. For a moment, no one moved. Not the camera operators, not the production assistants frozen in the wings, not the 300 people in those studio seats who had come expecting an entertaining hour of television and were now watching something they could not name and would not be able to fully describe afterward. Only that it felt less like a talk show and more like a reckoning. What Frank Sinatra said next would make Carson set down his note card, look directly into the camera, and say nothing. Because for the first and only time in 30 years of live television, Johnny Carson had absolutely nothing to say. If you've ever watched 2 men who never learned how to back down finally run out of room, you already know this story doesn't end quietly. Stay with us. It was October 1971, and The Tonight Show was the most powerful hour in American television. Not powerful the way people use that word loosely. Powerful in the specific, measurable sense that 17 million Americans sat down in front of their television sets every single weeknight and let Johnny Carson tell them what was worth watching, worth laughing at, and worth caring about. An appearance on that couch was not a promotional stop. It was a coronation or a verdict, depending on which chair you sat in and how the night went. Carson had made careers from that desk. He had also, quietly and without malice, ended a few. NBC Studio 1, Burbank, California. The set was warmer in person than it looked on television. Amber lighting that turned every guest slightly golden, a wood-paneled desk that Carson kept immaculately clear except for his note card and his mug, and floor-to-ceiling windows behind the guest chairs that looked out over the Los Angeles basin at night. 10,000 lights spread across the dark like something that wanted to be mistaken for stars. It was a room designed to make people feel at ease. That was its entire architecture: comfort, warmth, the illusion of a conversation between friends rather than a performance watched by a nation. John Wayne was 64 years old, and he had not come to perform. He had come to promote his new film, a straightforward appearance, the kind he did rarely and without enthusiasm, because Wayne had never fully trusted the talk show format. He was a man who communicated through action, through stillness, through the particular weight he carried when he walked into a room. Conversation as entertainment made him uneasy in a way that no camera had ever made him uneasy. He sat in the guest chair the way he always sat, slightly forward, both feet flat on the floor. A large man who had spent 40 years making the world believe that large men do not get tired and do not get frightened and do not under any circumstances need anything from anybody. The scar on his chest, where they had removed his left lung in 1964, pulled tight in the dry studio air. He did not adjust his posture. Frank Sinatra was 55, recently retired, and furious about something he could not entirely name. He had announced his retirement that same year, a formal public farewell that the music world had received with genuine grief. Then, quietly, he had begun to unretire, because the thing Sinatra could never adequately explain to anyone, including himself, was that the stage was not something he did. It was the only place the noise inside him stopped. Without it, the silence was unbearable. They had history, a shared world of studio lots, Vegas stages, and late-night rooms where the wrong things were sometimes said by the right people. And there was one night between them, 5 years buried, that neither man had spoken about publicly. Not once, not to anyone. That night was about to find its way into the light. Nobody books two men with unfinished business on the same couch by accident. Wayne's publicist had confirmed the taping date 3 weeks in advance. A standard promotional appearance, locked, straightforward, no complications anticipated. Sinatra's booking came 4 days later. The producers called it scheduling convenience, a mutual availability. 2 legends, 1 night, a gift to the audience. What nobody said out loud was that someone in that building had made a calculation. That the friction between these 2 men, whatever its source, whatever its shape, was the kind of thing that 17 million people would lean toward their television sets to watch. Carson knew. He always knew. When he stopped by the green room 40 minutes before taping, he read the room in under 10 seconds. The way Wayne sat at one end of the couch, with his jacket already on, already buttoned, the posture of a man who has decided he is already done with wherever he is. The way Sinatra stood near the window, with his back partially turned, holding a glass of water he hadn't touched, staring at the Los Angeles skyline with the focused attention of a man who is deliberately not looking at something behind him. They had shaken hands when Sinatra arrived. The production assistant in the room described it as the kind of handshake that communicates everything except warmth. Correct, firm, the physical equivalent of a formal document. After the handshake, they did not speak. 40 minutes in the same room, and not a single word passed between them. Carson absorbed this, said something easy and warm to both men separately, laughed at the right moments, touched nobody on the shoulder. Then he walked out, found his producer in the hallway, and said quietly, "Keep the first segment loose. Something is going on in there." What was going on had started 5 years earlier. Las Vegas, 1966. A night that began in a hotel suite and ended in a hallway at 3 a.m., with a bodyguard holding his jaw and 2 men who had said things to each other that could not be unsaid. No cameras, no witnesses who talked, no public record of any kind. Just the shared knowledge, sitting between them like a third person in every room they had occupied together since. Industry dinners, award ceremonies, the lobby of a studio where they had once nodded at each other with the careful neutrality of men who had made an agreement and were keeping it. The agreement was simple. What happened in Vegas stayed there. For 5 years, it had. The cameras rolled at 9:02 p.m. Carson's monologue landed perfectly. The audience was warm, loose, ready to be entertained. Wayne came out first, genuine applause, the kind that carries real affection underneath it. Sinatra followed, and the applause changed character entirely. More electric, more complicated. The sound of people responding to a man they found slightly dangerous, even sitting still. The first 12 minutes were flawless, Carson navigating between them with the precision of a man threading a needle in a moving vehicle. Effortless on the surface, total concentration underneath. Stories were told, laughter happened, the audience settled. Then Carson looked down at his note card and asked 4 words that he would spend the rest of his career wishing he could take back. Carson's 4 words were, "Who do you trust?" It was a question he used often, a reliable opener, warm and philosophical, the kind that let guests answer at whatever depth they chose. Light men gave light answers. Serious men went somewhere real. Carson had asked it 100 times from that desk, and it had never once started a fire. He looked at Wayne when he asked it, note card flat on the desk, comfortable, expecting something honest and quotable, and entirely manageable. Wayne thought for a moment. Then he began to answer, and the answer was good. Measured, specific, the kind of response that revealed character without exposing anything dangerous. He talked about the men he had worked with, directors he had trusted with his life on location, stuntmen who had never let him down. He was building towards something genuine, the audience leaning in, Carson nodding slowly, and then Wayne said one name he had not planned to say, attached to one memory he had not planned to share, and the name was Frank Sinatra. He didn't say it as an accusation. That was the thing that made it so difficult to navigate. He said it as an example of a man whose public face and private face were two entirely different instruments, and how learning the difference between them was what real trust actually required. It was almost a compliment. It contained enough ambiguity that Sinatra could have let it pass, could have smiled, nodded, turned it into a joke, and the moment would have dissolved into the amber light and disappeared. Sinatra did not let it pass. He cut in, not loudly, not aggressively, with the particular quiet precision of a man who has decided that being careful is no longer worth the effort. He said that Wayne had the story slightly wrong, that the private face Wayne was describing belonged to a night that was never meant to be a lesson, and that turning a private night into a public illustration was a specific kind of disrespect that he had not expected from this particular man in this particular room. The studio went absolutely silent. Wayne stopped, looked at Sinatra with the slow, complete attention of a man recalibrating every assumption he had walked in with. 1 full second of dead air on live television, a silence so total that the sound technicians later said they could hear the hum of the studio lights on the recording. "You want to finish it, Frank?" Wayne's voice was level, perfectly level. That was the danger signal, not the words, the levelness. Sinatra leaned forward. The mirror of Wayne's posture, precise and deliberate. And he said, quietly, directly, as if Carson and the cameras and the 300 people in those seats had simply stopped existing. That a man who knocked on doors at 3 a.m. and called it principle ought to be honest about what he was actually afraid of. That pride and fear wore the same coat. That Wayne, of all people, should know the difference. The audience didn't breathe. Carson set his note card down, not reaching for it, setting it down. The small, specific gesture of a man who has just understood that no card he prepared for tonight is relevant anymore. Wayne looked at Sinatra for a long moment. Then he looked at his own hands, flat on his knees. Then he looked back up, not at Sinatra, at Carson, and the expression on his face was something the audience had never seen on John Wayne before, and would never see again. Not anger, not humiliation, something quieter and far more devastating than either. He leaned back in his chair, one slow, deliberate movement, and said 4 words, "I know you do." Nobody in that studio fully understood what it meant. Sinatra understood. He sat back. The tension didn't break. It transformed, shifted into something heavier and more private, a frequency the audience could feel but not decode. Carson looked between the 2 men, picked up his coffee mug, took 1 slow sip, and said the single driest line of his entire 30-year career. Quiet enough that half the audience missed it, devastating enough that the other half laughed until they were breathless, and the show moved forward. But something in that room had permanently changed shape. The show ended at 10:58 p.m. The audience filed out slowly, the way people leave a room where something has happened that they cannot fully categorize. Not a fight, not a reconciliation, not a performance, something that existed in the space between all 3 and refused to be named. They moved toward the exits in clusters, speaking quietly, the volume of the room staying low in the instinctive way that people lower their voices after witnessing something that felt almost too private to have been public. Carson walked off the set, still holding his mug. His producer met him at the edge of the stage, a man named Fred who had been with the show for 6 years and prided himself on having seen everything there was to see in that building. Fred opened his mouth. Carson shook his head once, and Fred closed it. They walked to Carson's dressing room without speaking. Inside, Carson sat down in front of the mirror, looked at his own reflection for a long moment, and said to no one in particular, "That was not a television moment." He did not elaborate. Fred, standing in the doorway, understood exactly what he meant. Some things that happen on camera belong to the camera. What had happened tonight had merely been witnessed by it. Wayne was already changed and moving toward the exit when Sinatra came out of his dressing room. The hallway was fluorescent and unglamorous, linoleum floors, cables taped along the baseboards, the industrial reality behind the amber-lit world the audience saw. A young production assistant named Gloria, 24 years old and 3 months into her first job at NBC, was waiting at the end of the hall with a clipboard, assigned to escort guests to their cars. She saw Wayne first, jacket off, tie loosened, moving with the deliberate pace of a large man who is tired in a way that sleep doesn't entirely fix. Then Sinatra's dressing room door opened, and both men stopped. 6 feet of hallway between them. No cameras, no audience, no Carson threading the needle. Gloria later said she did not move because something in the air told her that moving would be the wrong thing to do. She stood at the end of that hallway with her clipboard, and she watched. Wayne spoke first. 1 sentence, not the 4 words from the stage, something different, something that landed in the hallway without echo, because it was spoken too quietly and too honestly to bounce off anything. Sinatra was still for a long moment. Long enough that Gloria thought he was going to walk past Wayne without responding, straight to the exit and into the night. He didn't walk past. He responded. And what he said, the thing Gloria would remember word for word for the next 22 years before she finally told anyone, had nothing to do with Las Vegas, nothing to do with the show, nothing to do with pride or fear or whose version of a private night was the correct one. It was about something older than all of it. What Sinatra said in that hallway was not recorded anywhere. Gloria kept it to herself for 22 years, not out of loyalty to either man, not out of any professional obligation, but because what she had witnessed felt like the kind of thing that loses something essential in the retelling. Some moments are not built to survive being described. They exist fully only in the body of the person who is present for them, and the moment you put them into words, they begin to shrink. She understood this at 24 without being able to articulate it, and she honored it the way instinctively decent people honor things they cannot explain. When she finally spoke about it, a 1993 interview with a television historian, recorded in her kitchen in Pasadena, camera small and unobtrusive on the counter, she said that Sinatra had told Wayne something about what it cost a man to be what the world required him to be, every single day, for 40 years, without a single room in which to be anything else. That the party in Las Vegas had been that room. That Wayne had walked into it, and Wayne had been right to walk into it, and Sinatra had been wrong to keep it going, and right to be angry about the intrusion all at the same time. That 2 things could be true. That this was the thing neither of them had ever been given sufficient credit for understanding. Wayne had looked at the floor, then back at Sinatra, then nodded, once, the kind of nod that in his particular emotional vocabulary carried the weight of everything he was not built to say out loud. Sinatra had walked to his car. Wayne had walked to his. Gloria had stood in that hallway alone for a full minute afterward, clipboard at her side, before she remembered she had a job to finish. Carson wrote about that night, only once, in a private letter to a colleague in 1989, 18 years after the taping. The letter contained 1 line that stopped people cold when it finally surfaced after his death. They were the last 2 men I ever met who still believed that pride was a virtue instead of a flaw. And watching them that night, I wasn't entirely sure they were wrong. They never shared a television stage again. Not by conflict, not by falling out, not by any formal decision that either man's publicist ever acknowledged. Simply by the quiet, mutual understanding of 2 people who had shown each other something real in a room full of cameras and had no particular desire to repeat the experiment. Some understandings don't require discussion. They settle into the space between people, and stay there, solid and unspoken, requiring nothing further. They were seen together publicly 3 times in the years that followed. Once at a charity dinner in 1973, once at a funeral in 1976, once at a private gathering in 1978 that neither man mentioned afterward. People who were present at all 3 occasions described the same thing each time: 2 men who greeted each other briefly, stood near each other without discomfort, and parted without drama. The body language of men who had finished something. Wayne died in June 1979. Stomach cancer. UCLA Medical Center. Sinatra visited in the final weeks, sat beside the bed, stayed less than 20 minutes, said whatever he said in a room with no witnesses. A nurse asked Wayne afterward if he needed anything. He said, "No, I'm good now." 11 days later, he was gone. 2 stubborn men, 40 years of parallel lives, 1 live television night that almost broke open, and 1 fluorescent hallway where something got quietly, permanently resolved. They don't make them like that anymore. And maybe that's exactly why these stories still matter. Subscribe so we can keep finding the ones that were almost lost.